Hi, my name is Evan Ferch with the SimmonsReview.com. For the past couple weeks, Dr. Terry Simmons and myself have conducted Friday evening news recaps for important stories that are going on during the week. This week we have something very special for you. We have the opportunity to bring in a couple more experts on these issues, specifically an issue we discussed last week, the Russian military presence in Syria. So this evening I'm going to sort of moderate a discussion between people here, and we'll get a little bit deeper into this issue. Tonight I have with me, as always, Dr. Terry Simmons, Professor of Political Science at IUPUI. We have Liz VerKamp, graduate of IUPUI's Political Science Department and a contributor to the SimmonsReview.com, and Professor Emeritus Charlie Winslow, former professor of Political Science at IUPUI. So let's get started here, and I guess open it up. If you have anything to say, just jump in. We'll go that way and have more of an organic discussion. Okay. My first question is, if the Russians take over responsibility from the Iranians for supporting the Assad regime, do you think Iran will refocus its attention to the Persian Gulf and the Shia-Sunni struggle for influence in southern Iraq, Bahrain, Yemen, that area?
Actually, I think we should start with Liz VerKamp on that aspect.
I don't know. I don't know that Soleimani plans to have the Russians take over anything for him. Is he looking for Russian help? Sure. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't mind the support. I don't see Soleimani stepping out of the way as far as the way that the Shia militias are run in Iraq. I don't see Iran stepping away from funding Hezbollah. I don't see Hezbollah stepping away from supporting militias in Syria. I don't see them backing away so much from support of Assad as the Russians just want to be more involved in protecting their interest in Tartus and the airfield that they're building in Latakia in order to keep Daesh out of Idlib province.
Yeah. So you see, and Terry, you can maybe jump in on this. So it's really more about Russia having a presence, having an influence in the region?
Well, I just lectured about this afternoon in my Russian class at IUPUI, Russian politics. And we set up two discussion groups, pro hypothesis and against the hypothesis. The working hypothesis being that Putin wants to come in and secure the area for Russian interests, and that Bashar may be negligible or not really relevant anymore. Now that's suppositional. There's no evidence to really support that. I'm going on a theory that I think that they will be in a position to replace him if necessary. If he indeed only rules 16% of Syria, which is the last stat I remember seeing, then he's marginalized, and the Russians have a big piece of equity in this game. And they want to make sure that they get representation regardless of what happens to Assad. So I see it as a prophylactic, as a kind of a preemptive move to say whatever happens to him really doesn't matter to us. He's been a client for a long time, but if his utility is used up, we can marginalize him and package somebody to slide right into the saddle, or they can just go ahead and co-opt him out of the way and take over the province. How it's going to happen, there's a lot of information flow and a lot of key variables working right now.
So they want to control the end game?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's always a given with the Russians if they have a client state, and when they start moving in portable command centers, they're serious.
Yeah. I'd like to, Dr. Winslow, if I could get a little bit on this. If you give me sort of a brief maybe history of the Russian presence in Syria, why Syria? Why are the Russians, do they have a long history, or what is their history with that country?
Well, it depends on, when you talk to me, you're talking long, you're talking 1311, so.
Maybe the past couple hundred years.
Ever since, and I'm sure Terry can tell us a little more about it than I can, but ever since the radical Ba'ath took over in Syria in the middle 60s and later in the 70s with the Assad regime, the Syrian regime became a minority regime of the kind which is always extremely insecure. It's from an Alawite province, up in the northeast of, northwest of Syria on the coast, in the mountains especially. The clan has really been in control ever since the Assads were at the Homs Military Academy, where they became generals and learned the military things under the French earlier, much earlier, of course, between the wars. And then, of course, Russia has been the armorer of Syria, mainly against Israel, or for their escapades into Lebanon and things of that sort. Syrian Russian armor supported George H.W. Bush in the first Gulf War. So it hasn't been completely a polarized situation relative. Everything that happens to the Russians that's good is bad for us. It wasn't that kind of zero-sum situation. However, the Assad regime itself, this is a little complicated, I'll try to make it brief. They can't just fall like any other regime, because the whole community would fall, the whole Alawite apparatus would fall, and they've been a kleptocracy for years. They've been a smuggler state. They have business interests that are completely wrapped up in their control of Syria. They're actually hated mostly by the Sunnis. They're not hated as much by the Christian communities, both the ones that speak Aramaic in the anti-Lebanon mountains or the ones in the Jazeera district, because they are actually more afraid of the Sunnis than they are of the Alawites, who are also a minority like themselves. They're a little freer, too, about how Damascus can be run than the other Sunni states. I mean, you have topless dancing in Damascus. You don't have that in Riyadh or in Mecca, I don't think. Let me just say that the main thing I see here is not that Putin is running the show, but that Barack Obama is running the show. And I think that's behind the scenes. I'll come back to that. But I think what they really want is one piece at a time, and the first thing to do is to get rid of ISIS. Now that Iran has been placed as a backdrop strategically, as it wasn't before, possibly, to become one, it's possible that at least that outcome can be obtained in a reasonable amount of time. The Russians and the Iranians could both help in that. That's a dilemma, because that's a Sunni state, and of course most of our oil helpers are Sunni states. You have to factor into this as well that the oil prices have floored lately, and that hurts both the Arabian and Gulf countries, Iran, and Russia.
Yeah, Russia's really victimized there.
So once sort of the common enemy that's united global powers and regional powers, ISIS, is taken care of, then sort of the real competition for who controls Syria and who controls the region can get started. Is that sort of what you're...
Well, that's a very intelligent comment on your part. In the Middle East, if one can get one fragment of one fragment settled, one thing should be done very well. So, Syria is the most fragmented area probably of any in the Middle East, and they're all fragmented. There are fragments of fragments.
Yeah.
And so you're dealing with a can of worms at every step. Anything you try to do with money or power is liable just to blow back at you. It will blow back at ISIS too. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I think the Obama regime is saying to itself, well, with the Iranian deal made, we don't have to put all our energies into that. Mm-hmm. We have to decide between doing Assad or doing ISIS. ISIS is the thing that really is important.
I don't think enough can be said about the power that the president has by creating a coalition of oil-producing countries that have agreed to keep the price of a barrel of oil low. One of those countries is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which currently has like about $664 billion of cash reserves on hand that they're blowing through at about $20 billion a month. They're not making money right now because the price of oil, the price of a barrel of oil is too low. So they're, in KSA, the Al Saud, are betting that the price of a barrel of oil will go up, will increase before 3 years' time has elapsed, or they'll run out of money. I don't know what kind of cash reserves Russia has on hand. I would imagine they would keep that secret
That's
to
a closely
themselves.
held
Yeah.
number there.
You know, conversely, the Chinese Communist Party has $4 trillion of cash reserves on hand.
It's
So
good
they
point.
can buy their time
Yeah.
and extend a credit line to Assad, Russia, Iran, or Hezbollah, or whoever wants to prop up the Assad regime.
I'd like to
Or-
float.
Or what it goes, or what it becomes, what it morphs
I'd
into.
like to float a thought here. Does anybody here think that there's the possibility that since the Ukrainian situation has kind of become kind of a backroom news story now, they're kind of in limbo right now, that I've heard rumors, and that they're unsubstantiated, that there may be a 400-kilometer entry level that they can infiltrate more troops in at night on the western side of Kyiv. And I've seen some of that in writing. I've talked to a few people. I don't know if it has legs, but it's a persistent rumor. If you want to kind of hide what you're doing in Ukraine, a stealth move, if it were, to kind of infiltrate and get ready to take over more provinces, more oblasts in the east, this would be an opportune diversion to kind of concentrate on where we're going to send a lot of condors fully loaded with minimum material, and you know, we're going to make a big news splash, and they're getting all the media to join right in on it. And if that's a purposeful move, they're successful.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody here think that maybe there's a kind of a double move game going on here, that hiding moves in Ukraine and distracting with Syria? Not necessarily on purpose, but is it happening that way? Anybody see that?
Well, I guess you wouldn't want to put obfuscation past Putin. It seems like that would be.
Oh, no, that's
his main
that's
play.
Putin's method.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't think enough can be said about how important controlling, having economic or geographical control over Eastern Europe can be if you want to dominate the Eurasian landmass, because it really is the center of the center, outside of the four center squares of the chessboard of the Middle East.
I think that Putin probably knows that in the ultimate, any kind of military position he has at Latakia in Tartus is vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And so he doesn't really have the chess pieces to play there. He was night forked before there when the Sochi Olympics were more important to him than standing down Obama on the question of nerve gas. If I were looking at it with more contemporary expertise, and I don't have that now, I'm a tomato patch all the time, you know, doing my gardening, I think I would still see that Russia does not have an awful lot of cards to play in the Middle East. It never has had. It's always wanted to, but it doesn't really have.
So do I hear you saying limited grand strategy?
So I'm thinking it's more likely that, I don't know that this specific move is one to get us all interested in that area so it can do something else. It wouldn't put it past Putin to do something like that, or any Russian czar for that matter. But I think Obama is fixed on the whole point that we've got to do something about ISIS. And this is the way to do it, with Iran at the backdrop and the the Russians with a military presence. If they can help us get rid of ISIS, then, as you said, then we can talk about the game after that.
Yeah.
And the game after that doesn't favor Russia.
Yeah.
It really doesn't.
Well, Lavrov said that the reason that they're building up the military airfield that they have near Latakia, and they're paving and smoothing new runways and rehabbing quarters for soldiers, is that they want to keep Daesh out of further advancing in Idlib province and keep them away from.
If you don't mind me
Away
asking,
from
would you
there.
reiterate for our audience the reference Daesh or Daesh?
Oh,
'Cause I think a lot of people don't know that.
Daesh is it's the Arabic acronym for the Islamic State.
Okay.
And it's kind of a not the nicest thing to say.
No, it isn't. They
So
use an
it's kind of a
acronym to
derogatory.
make something in Arabic that is quite
So it's a
pejorative.
pejorative.
Yes, garbage.
Yeah, very much so.
to speak.
Yeah.
That's
Vaguely.
Thank you.
Yeah, now the airfield at Laodicea has been mentioned a couple times. I want to sort of focus in on that for a second.
Sure.
I've seen the satellite photographs, I'm sure you have, of the repaving, putting in
Sure.
the airfields. And there's also been some talk of Russian UAVs and possibly fighters being seen in Syrian airspace. My question is, what is the U.S. response supposed to be to that? I mean, do you envision maybe a joined no-fly zone, or what do you think? And Terry, you can jump on this too. What is Russian heavy military equipment, possibly even Russian soldiers engaging in combat? What does that mean for the U.S. response?
If I see MiGs, I'll have a level of concern. But if I see attack helicopters, Heinz, now I'm really concerned. And I would be if I'm NATO South, because it'll fall on them to defend against that corridor. So if that happens and it looks more like a forward movement, and the critical press that I'm reading is describing it more as a forward operating base. And the question becomes, why? Are you really protecting Assad? Is Assad marginalized to the point you have to step in because you don't want to ultimately lose the Russian piece of the pie? Where's the motivation here? Because motivation, and all the DOD newsletters I'm saying they don't want to get near that one. So that tells me that's where the action is.
Yeah.
So my estimation is that the biggest problem is confliction. If you get the Condors, the heavy transports coming in, denied airspace over southern Europe to the Ada Quadrant, and they have to come in through Iran and over Iraq through the Kurds, you're going to have a danger of being Assad attacked. Also, fighter escort and so on, it'll become a belligerent zone with more danger of contact. So to answer your question more directly, I don't really think that anybody's really concentrating on the political, except maybe in the basement at the White House.
Yeah.
Everybody else is busy watching the kinetic possibilities.
So do you see, I mean, if the fight is sort of a combined effort against ISIS, do you envision U.S. and Russian forces cooperating in operations, or?
They say officially they will not talk to each other. Their command centers are not hooked. There's no red phone, there's no hookup at this point. Now, I don't know if that's factual or not, it's just released in the open press.
Yeah.
You have to manage this problem. World opinion is a big variable in this problem, so everybody's being very careful in their news releases. There's a lot of sanction and sanitation going on here, and it's understandable because it's sensitive. This could go south in a hurry. If you get kinetic contact, either at sea in submarines, or you get an ACL launch, or something of that nature, and something goes bad, it could go bad in a hurry. Because now you got the big players in it, you got East and West, and they're on a collision course with other issues anyway. I really see ISIS as stalking horse. They're a big player in this. I think they're doing a lot of damage. Everyone wants to eventually get rid of them, but it's a war of attrition. And so I see the big players coming nose to nose here, and that's the danger.
All right, if we could move on a little bit from this, and this is going to be a bit of a broad question, but I think it's something our readers our viewers will be interested in, because there's been so much flying around about, is the Iranian deal a good or bad deal? And there's a lot of confusion, a lot of different opinions being thrown around. So I guess my question is, if you could, fairly briefly, just give me your expert opinion on what you see the Iranian deal as meaning for relations, meaning for stability of the Middle East, things of that nature.
I think you should start.
Well, I would say that once it was made, it was a fait accompli. There wasn't any way to stop it, because all the rest of the powers had decided that it was good enough for them to get along, and then that way they would perhaps be able to find some route for greater stability in the Middle East. I'd like to talk about a couple of things that other people wouldn't be talking about in terms of this. A lot of people don't know it, but Iran is not an Arab-speaking country. It's not a Semitic country. They don't make their sentences with trilateral roots and but it's not Igpayatanlay, as we say. It's made of Indo-European roots, like German, English, and Sanskrit. And we think, some of us that are historically interested in this, that it is much easier for Indo-European-speaking peoples to understand each other in complicated negotiations. They will know where the stoppers are. While people who speak of poetic, literary, emotional language that is often very interested in the cuteness of the language, in the cleverness of the music, in like Payattenlay. And you probably don't remember those in your day, but way back World War II, we spoke Pig Latin.
Right.
Okay, so the Semitic languages do that naturally because they sat around for campfires for 2,000 or 3,000 years as Bedouins playing with language. The Iranians came from the mountains, and they're Persians, they're Iranian, Aryan, and I think that element that they're Indo-European speaking means that there's a very core nativist part of their culture that would respond to us in ways that maybe Saudi Arabians wouldn't, or even the real native Hebrew Jews wouldn't with their Semitic language. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think the goal is to defeat, from Obama's point of view, is to defeat an enemy that is almost never spoken of. And that's conflict itself. That is to get rid of the traffic jam. Traffic jam is really the great enemy of political performance. It's not conflict itself, because once conflict begins, there is some relationship. It's when nobody can do anything. Everybody's trapped in the fog of war and in the fog of incomplete diplomacy and in all the little particulars wanting their peace, whether it be an Israeli religious party or Iranian Revolutionary Guard and so on. So the enemy is conflict, and the enemy is the traffic jam of not being able to get on with being in the modern world. One of the biggest pieces they think will come out of this for us is that the enemy is the world What will signify success is when the global economy goes on and actually helps Iranians and then someday maybe Syrians and so on, rather than having people trapped in the gray world of socialism, the gray world of dogmatic Islam and so on. And what they're counting on, the Iranian people will make sure that the mullahs do not take them back into a sanctioned world. I think the West is really counting on that to happen.
I'm sorry to tell you this, but there's no quick answer to this.
That's what I expected.
Yeah, we figured that one.
Yeah.
When the president came into office, he was already thinking like a chess grandmaster. The most important thing that he wanted to accomplish was to simultaneously create a bulwark against the CCP's state capitalism and the way that they were heading with controlling all of the Eurasian landmass and Europe and Africa and the resources and the trade associated with that. He also wanted to right several egregious foreign policy disasters in the history of the United States. And the first of those had to do with Truman and Burma. The second had to do with Eisenhower and Iran. The third had to do with Eisenhower right at the end of his presidency and Cuba. The Iran deal is part of that. In addition to that, the trade deals that he's created, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, trade partnership, and the new Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with Europe, all making a deal to pull Burma kicking and screaming into international responsibility, making a deal to pull Iran kicking and screaming into international responsibility, doing the same thing with Cuba. The trade deals are part of removing as much of the Eurasian sphere and Africa and trade and shifting it away from China and toward the United States.
So it's moving spheres of influence.
So the Iran deal is part of that.
So is this part of the map redrawing I keep seeing the reference to? This is a post construction or deconstruction of 1991 the post-Cold War world. And of course that was on the heels of the post-World War II arrangements through Bretton Woods and so on. Is this a rearranging of the furniture? Is this a massive
Well, certainly,
movement of
as
pieces?
Liz has pointed, I'll let her go on with that hypothesis, which is a very interesting one. Set of propositions about the larger historical and geostrategic purposes of the Americans, and including Barack Obama. Certainly, China's power and the money we owe China is worrisome. They can't really do anything with the money unless there's an ordered global economy, because they don't. So it isn't as threatening as, of course, people would say it was. If they can't use their army to get the money back, so to speak. They depend on there being a flourishing global economy. They're in a driver's seat for that with cheap labor, and they have very talented people and a very creative and quickly industrializing country. So they will be the longer term challenge for the Americas and for Europe. And so maybe corralling Putin and just containing him a bit and letting him play games and so on, but not do anything serious. I mean, you strategically Latakia and any kind of base in Syria, it's not going to do Russians any good. They're just like picking your queen and putting it out on Castle One on the opposition and getting it trapped. They're not in any position to deal down there. They have to go all the way around through the Straits of Gibraltar to get. Well, they can go through the Dardanelles, but those can be closed quickly.
Especially when the Russian domestic front is kind of going to pot. Russians aren't.
So I
very happy.
think the new player here, and that's related to what Liz is talking about. The new player here is people want to have part of the global prosperity that is possible, technically possible for everybody to have.
So Charlie, are we moving?
And so the
people out?
Syrians moved out and said, well, we're going to Europe like Moroccans and Algerians and other people are going, because that's where you can get jobs and live a good life. You can't live a good life in this cesspool of fragmentation and war and conflict.
I'm so glad you brought that up. The president is also very tired of dealing with states like the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Arab states, especially KSA, where their human rights records are so abysmal. Iran, it's a quasi-democracy, and he feels that it's possible to draw the government towards what the people want rather than what the clerics want.
And the Iranian, correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that the Iranian people on the street are far more pro-American than, say, the Saudi population. Is that an accurate
Yes.
assessment?
Well, we don't know what the Saudi
We don't really know
population. Half of them are in beekeepers' uniforms, so we really don't know.
Yeah.
They would like to get out in their SUVs as women and play around on the sand dunes like the men do.
Well, let me say, we have an associate there. He writes for the SimmonsReview.com. His name's Iman Sorabi, who's actually in Tehran right now. And as soon as he gets back in about a week, we're going to do a live interview with him, and we're going to ask him that very question.
Before we take a break, I want to go ahead with what she was saying here about one thing. As you know, my position is that the real mover is people's desire to lead basically modern, prosperous lives, or at least decent lives. And they will move and flee failed states whenever they possibly can.
Yeah.
Now, Iran is a kind of quasi-democracy, just like Israel is a quasi-democracy. Now, in Israel, a Palestinian can't live in the center of Safed, which is an old Sunni Arab city for 1,500 years. So that's not democracy. They still live under the basic law of the mandatory period. They don't have their own constitution. It's basically a majoritarian state. Iran, you can certainly be too excited about their democratic tendencies, because after all, the council, the Supreme Council, vets all the candidates.
Yeah,
But still there's play there.
Yeah, but this is something that's been going on for about 4 decades, and you know that these types of governments, like what we have in Iran now, tend to run their course after a few decades.
Yes, I do think it has
And it
a
is
good
time-
chance
it
of
is-
becoming
It's time for a change.
some kind of democracy
And
the
I
way
think we
the
will see
Eastern
that.
European countries
Right.
have.
Excellent, excellent. This has been a very good discussion. We're going to take a brief break. Again, my name is Evan Ferch. This is for the SimmonsReview.com. Hope you enjoyed this video, and please tune in to a second video on part 2 of our discussion, where we've talked politics. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the human side of this issue and talking about the migrant crisis in Europe. So thank you very much.